Let's be completely honest here. The Las Vegas Raiders were certainly fooling themselves if they thought that 2024 was going to be great for them. I mean, just look at the context of the division that they were in. You're going up against Andy Reid and Sean Payton and Jim Harbaugh, let alone you're going up against Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, a rookie Bo Nix, and the Raiders had Antonio Pierce, and does it really matter what they had at quarterback? No. They were clearly going to be bringing up the rear of the division, and they certainly did not disappoint to that, did they? They finished 4-13, didn't win a divisional game. Yeah, it was just a rough season for the Raiders. One of those examples of where they caught kind of fool's gold the season before when Antonio Pierce took over as the interim guy. They decided to make him the full-time head coach, and yeah, there you go. Now, certainly, the failures of last season don't solely, exclusively, or even primarily fall on the shoulders of Antonio Pierce. He was just one part of a much bigger problem, which was just a lack of talent all across the roster and the organization. So it's not a surprise that they fired Antonio Pierce. Maybe a little more surprising they were so quick to fire general manager Tom Telesco at the end of the season because he had just gotten there. But you know what? Time for a clean sweep. That's what the hell they did. And, there's a lot of different directions you could go. And when you're in the division with somebody like an Andy Reid, a Jim Harbaugh, a Sean Payton, you want to go out and find somebody that, at least from a coaching standpoint, can hold their own. And in some respects, to some degree, you could argue that they did with the hiring of Pete Carroll as their next head coach. Now, we know Pete Carroll, this is a guy with a long track record. He's been a head coach, 3 other spots, most notably his time in Seattle with the Legion of Boom defense, 2 conference championships, a Super Bowl championship, multiple division playoff appearances, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. That sounds all fine and good in a vacuum. You're like, yeah, you brought in a really experienced head coach that's won a Super Bowl. Those types of guys aren't available every day. Yeah, but he's also going to be 74 in a couple of weeks, and once the regular season starts, he's going to be the oldest head coach in NFL history. And you're starting the Pete Carroll era with him being 74 and the oldest head coach in NFL history. You could say it levels the field a little bit, but does it really? I mean, how often can you look at NFL history and see guys getting a 4th opportunity to be a head coach, let alone being successful in that 4th stop? Maybe 4 stops is 1 stop too many. Just because on paper it looks good, in paper it looks like it's a big move, it doesn't mean that it was the right one. Sure, you're going to have those people talk about he establishes a culture and he does this and he does that. That's a bunch of bullshit. Because in 2 to 3 years, you're going to be looking to hire another head coach. That's just crazy. Why the hell would you want to do that? For a team that needs stability and continuity, the way you're going to drive stability and continuity is by hiring a guy that should have probably long since retired. You're going to have to replace in a couple of years. Make it make sense is all I'm saying. But, here we are. Pete Carroll is going to be on the sidelines as the Raiders head coach. First big move they made in the offseason was trading for Geno Smith. And look, Geno is not a superstar quarterback by any stretch of the imagination, but he's a pretty good one. And for the Raiders, looking at this past draft, probably realizing, hey, there's not really a quarterback that we love here. We're not going to be in a position to get a Cam Ward. So got to make the best of the situation that we have. Easily justifiable, easily worth trading a 3rd-round pick for Geno Smith. Had to do it. It's the most important position, and you could at least make an argument that Geno, where you're looking for Pete Carroll to kind of level the playing field in terms of the head coaches in that division, Geno Smith helps bring them a little closer to par in that division, where the Raiders don't have to feel like they have a significant liability at the most important position. You get what I'm saying? They went out in free agency, and they got active a little bit, especially on their defense, signing Jeremy Chin, Eric Stokes, Devin White, Eladon Roberts, Jermaine Pratt. So they basically overhauled their entire starting linebacker unit and brought in a couple of starters for their secondary. Then they cut Christian Williams supposedly for being a creep. Yeah, that's a big money free agent signing that certainly didn't work out very well, did it? They gave him all that guaranteed money. What did he play, 5 games for the Raiders? Whoopsie daisies, sometimes shit happens. Yikes, yikes, yikes. So now as you go into the NFL draft, they're sitting there with the 6th overall pick. What do? And now I'll always defend the Raiders for this pick no matter how it worked out. Like, the pick was Ashton Jeanty. It needed to be Ashton Jeanty. It had to be Ashton Jeanty. When you look at that draft and where the marquee players were, the draft position, the lack of really worthy quarterbacks at the top outside of Cam Ward, it had to be you go best player available. And when you talk about Pete Carroll coming in and his philosophy and how much he loves to run the football, Ashton Jeanty makes a ton of sense. And now all of a sudden you get the chance for a second superstar offensive skill player after taking Brock Bowers with the 13th overall pick in last year's draft. And you saw the historic rookie season he had as a tight end. Hard to knock that approach now. So can't really knock what they did here with Ashton Jeanty. Then they drafted Jack Betch, who they're hoping will come in and be another weapon in the receiving corps. Darian Porter in the 3rd round. They're hoping will be a solid, at least minimum starter in that secondary. So all of this transition, all of this movement, what are the strengths for this team in 2025? I start with Geno Smith, right? They've got competent quarterback play. And you're going to say, well, they had that with Derek Carr. I'd take this version of Geno over probably any version of Derek Carr personally. But again, kind of reaching here a little bit. I got to find some strengths to talk about, some positives. I certainly think Geno Smith is one of them. And then I had the aforementioned offensive skill players. I already talked about Ashton Jeanty. Assume he's going to be a stud in the NFL. Brock Bowers is already proven a stud in the NFL. And then Jacoby Myers is a pretty solid wide receiver. He's not a superstar wide receiver, but he's pretty damn solid. So you got those 3 guys in the mix along with Geno Smith, and all of a sudden you got a reason for a little bit of excitement surrounding this Las Vegas Raiders offense. And then I look at what I mentioned a moment ago and how active they were in free agency, and their linebacking core now with White and Roberts and Pratt should be significantly upgraded versus what they had in 2024, and guys that will fit the Pete Carroll defensive system. In terms of question marks for this team, there's a lot of them, but I can't laundry list all of them. But I'll start with the pass rush outside of Max Crosby. Is Tyree Wilson going to take to Pete Carroll's system? Is he going to be a guy that actually tries to play up to his former draft position of being the 7th overall pick? Unlikely, but we shall see. But they need somebody other than Max Crosby to consistently get after the quarterback and cause some problems. Then you look at the secondary. Yeah, they've spent some money there with Chin and Stokes. They drafted Darian Porter, but still feels like it's a unit that has some weakness for sure. Feels like a unit that can be exploited, especially when you look at the limited pass rush this team has outside of Max Crosby. And then I think the question mark still to me is Pete Carroll at 74 years old. You're in uncharted territory. Yeah, he has been successful, that's for sure. But, it feels like all these guys have a life cycle to them, right? It feels like you're on the wrong side of that. And, is he going to be able to maintain his energy that has helped him be successful at previous roles? Is he going to be a guy that's going to have a philosophy that's too dated, not going to be able to keep up with the NFL? And you're going to say, well, that feels like a bit of an overreaction because he's only been out of the game for a year. Yeah, that's true, but was he getting kind of behind the times already at the end of his Seattle run? I think it's a fair question. You know what I'm saying? So lots of question marks for this team. And look, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'd be highly surprised if anybody picked the Raiders realistically to do anything other than last in this division. Crazier shit has happened. Injuries can happen. Teams can get on a roll. Any number of things. But it just feels like the inevitable outcome here. When I look at key stretches of schedule for this team, I look at, I think it's weeks 4 through 7. You host Chicago, at Indianapolis, Tennessee, and then at the Chiefs. That's a stretch there, even as a Bears fan, if you're the Raiders, you got them at home. That has to feel like a game that you can win. The Colts, the Titans, feel like games you can win, and then you got a big test against the Chiefs in Arrowhead. If you can come out of that 4-week stretch of games at 3-1, you're starting to say something. Even if you're 2-2, you're like, hey, we're respectable. We're winning some damn games. And then you go a few weeks later, it's the 6-week stretch where they've got Jacksonville, they go to Denver, host Dallas, host Cleveland, go to the Chargers, host Denver. So there's 3 divisional games in that stretch, and you got other games against teams that you would reasonably presume are going to be bad. the Jaguars, the Browns. So that's a stretch of schedule right there. Like maybe you think you can go 3-3. Maybe you're optimistic and you can go 4-2. Who knows? But you definitely, if you go 3-3, you want to win at least one of those divisional games in there to give yourself any type of shot. I certainly expect the Raiders are going to be improved this year. They're going to be better coached and better quarterback play. They've added some talent to their roster, but there's a gap there between them and the Chargers and the Broncos and the Chiefs in that division. So I think they win 6 games. If they're lucky, maybe 7, but more likely not 6 games and still bring up the rear in the AFC West. And then you have to ask yourself, why'd you hire a 74-year-old head coach in his 4th head coaching gig to win 6 fucking games?